Hello there, welcome to Pre-Cal section 1.7 through 1.9 test review solutions, where we're going to be going over this worksheet. So let's get to it. All right, number one, we want to add these two quantities. So first, what I'll do is distribute that negative sign across these two terms. So minus 7x and then minus 8. I'm going to leave them in brackets for now. Probably don't really have to since it's plus. And then distribute this negative sign, so that's negative 11x cubed. Negative negative would be plus 4x squared, and then minus 13x. Okay, so we could really go ahead now, since that's a plus. I'll write it out, but you wouldn't probably have to do this step. Minus 7x minus 8 plus negative would just be minus 11x cubed, and then plus would be plus 4x squared, and then plus minus is minus 13x. And let's combine like terms. So you want to start with the largest exponent, so that's going to be negative 11x cubed. And then we'd have 14x squared plus 4x squared. That's going to be plus 18x squared. And then we have negative 13x, negative 7x, that'd be minus 20x. And then you have the constant minus 8. All right, so yeah, that checks out, so we'll circle that. You want to be real careful on these types of problems on the test. They're really pretty easy, but I always hate it when a student misses one of these just because they were careless. All right, number two, we're going to multiply 5y squared minus 2 times 4y squared minus 1. So we're going to use FOIL. So FOIL is something we're going to be doing a lot this year. So 5y squared times 4y squared would be 20y to the fourth. And then 5y squared times the outside negative 1 would be minus 5y squared. And then the inside would be negative 2 times 4y squared. So that's minus 8y squared. And then finally negative 2 times negative 1 would be plus 2. Let's combine like terms, so that's going to be 20y to the fourth minus 13y squared when we combine the two middle terms, plus 2. And that checks out. All right, number 3, we want to find the product. That's a fancy way of saying multiply. So x minus 4 times x squared minus 3x plus 2 plus x. Okay, we're going to distribute the x across all four terms and then the negative 4 across all four terms and then combine. So x times x squared would be x cubed. X times negative 3x would be minus 3x squared. X times 2 would be plus 2x, and then plus x squared. And then we will do the negative 4. So negative 4 times x squared would be minus 4x squared. Negative 4 times negative 3x would be plus 12x. Negative 4 times 2 would be minus 8. And then negative 4 times x would be minus 4x. So we've got to combine like terms. There's no other x cubed, so that's going to stay. And then you can mark these out if you want. Negative 3x squared plus x squared is negative 2x squared. Minus 4 would be minus 6x squared. And then there are x terms would be 2x plus 12x. That's 14x minus 4x, so that'd be plus 10x. And then finally we would have minus 8. Let me double check and make sure I didn't mess anything up. X cubed minus 6x squared plus 10x minus 8. So, boom. All right, these do take up a little bit of real estate, don't they? So, you can fast forward through this, and we'll go on to number 4. Okay, so number 4, we want to expand 5x minus 3y cubed. Well, first, let's square it. Okay, so that's going to be 5x minus 3y times 5x minus 3y. So if we FOIL that out, that's going to be 25x squared, first terms, then minus 15xy, another minus 15xy, so that's minus 30xy. And then the last term, negative 3y times negative 3y, would be plus 9y squared. So we've squared it, and now we are going to multiply by the third 5x minus 3y. And then multiply it by this. So 25x squared minus 30xy plus 9y squared. So this is going to take us a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and go down a line here. So 5x times 25x squared would be 125x cubed. 5x times negative 30y would be minus 150x squared y. 5x times 9y squared would be plus 45xy squared. All right, the second term, negative 3y times 25x squared would be minus 75x squared y. Negative 3y times negative 30x would be plus 90xy squared. Negative 3y times 9y squared would be minus 27y cubed. All right, so let's combine like terms. There's no other x cubed terms, so 125x cubed. All right, x squared y. So we've got negative 150, negative 75. So that's going to be minus 225x squared y. And then xy squared, I've got 45 and 90. So that'd be plus 135 xy squared. And then finally the minus 27y cubed. All right, doing this all in my head. So let's see if I made any mistakes. Just checking the answer real quick, and I'm good to go. So if you can do the math in your head, it'll save time, but you can always use your calculator. All right, number 5, we want to multiply 2 times 7v plus t, quantity 7v plus t, minus 4 times quantity 7v plus t plus 4. Now this looks terrible. It's actually not real bad because everything in brackets here I can FOIL, and the middle term, the O and the I, they're going to cancel out. So I'm just going to drop down that 2. 7v plus t times 7v plus t would be 7v plus t all squared. And then we have 4 times 7v plus t, the outside, minus 4 times 7v plus t, the inside. That just goes away. And then the last is negative 4 times 4. That would be minus 16. All right, I'm going to go ahead and expand this term. So that's going to be 7v plus t times 7v plus t. So that would be 49v squared plus 7vt plus another 7vt, so plus 14vt, and then plus t squared. So we've got a 2 times all of this, 49v squared plus 14vt plus t squared minus 16. And now I just have to distribute the 2. So that'd be 98v squared plus 28vt plus 2t squared minus 32. Awesome. And I'm just double checking. Yep, got that one right. So the old brain is still clicking even at my advanced age. All right, so Let's erase this. You can fast forward through this part if you're watching. Okay, number 6, we want to factor nine a to the fourth b squared plus 15a cubed b cubed plus 6a to the fourth b cubed plus 3a cubed b squared. Okay, when you see 4 terms, a lot of times you think, oh, let's factor by grouping. But I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if you factor by grouping, if we did these two together and these two together, in this case you get the exact same greatest common factor. So if that happens, there's no point in factoring by grouping. We'll just factor out the greatest common factor, and you can see between 9, 15, 6, and 3, your greatest common divisor among those constants would be a 3. And then a to the fourth, a cubed, a to the fourth, a cubed. You could factor out an a cubed. B squared, b cubed, b cubed, b squared. We could factor out a b squared. And then let's see what's left. So this, dividing this greatest common factor into this first term would be 3a. And then dividing this into the second term would be 5b. And then dividing the GCF into the third term would be 2ab. And then in the fourth term, they're the same, right? 3a cubed b squared. So that doesn't just go away. It's actually a 1. All right, so in this case, the best you can do is factor out that greatest common factor, and then you really can't do any more factoring. And again, the clue to that is if you group and it's the same greatest common factor, you would, there's really no sense in factoring by grouping anymore. All right, so number 7, I tell you to factor by grouping. So that makes it easy. We have 14 uy minus 21u minus 6xy plus 9x. Okay, so it's easier if you can factor the two side by side. Looking at that, we'd have a 7 and a u would work. And with these two, a 3 would go into the two constants, and then we have an x. So those are different, so factoring by grouping is useful. So we'd have a 7u, and then what's left with this first term would be 2y. And with the second term would just be 3, so minus 3. Hold on off on the sign, we have a 3x. It should be 2y minus 3. All right, so 2y, and that checks out. We want it to be the same. I know it could be plus there, but we're going to fix that with this sign out front. We want that term and that term to be the same. It's really not helpful what we're doing. And if we do a minus right here, then when you distribute that minus sign, you get the minus here and the plus here. So that works. So now we can put the two coefficient terms together. 7u minus 3x, all right, and then times 2y minus 3. And how could you check that? If you FOIL it back out, you would come back with this. I'm not going to do that, but that's how you would check it. All right, number 8. Let's see if I can fit that here. We just want to factor. And this is just your garden variety trinomial. So we're going to have to do this by trial and error. So 2a squared minus 11ab minus 6b squared. There's not perfect squares on the ends, so it doesn't fit that factoring pattern. So we're just going to have to trial and error it unless you want to use one of the methods, different method you learned in Algebra 2. I think this is pretty easy because 2 is a prime number and the only thing we can even put in is 2a and a. It's the only thing that works. Well, with 6, we have 6 times 1 and we have 3 times 2. And of course, we could reverse that. And I need a negative 11 in the center. What I'm thinking is a 1 times 6. If I put a 1 here and a 6 here, I have a 12 and then a 1, and I think I can get an 11 out of that. So let's try. Of course, we have the b here, so we're just going to put b and 6b. All right, so b times 6b, and then we're going to need to have a negative 11. So if I put a negative there and a plus there, let's FOIL that back out. I've got 2a squared minus 12ab plus ab. That'd give me a negative 11, and then minus 6b squared. So that's my process, and so that's not too bad at all. All right. So thank goodness for fast forward, right? Okay, so number 9, we want to factor 18x to the 4th y plus 24x cubed y squared minus 10x squared y cubed. Okay, so with this one, you don't have on the two ends a perfect square. So remember, the first thing you want to do is try to factor out the greatest common factor. So with 18, 24, and 10, we could factor out a 2 and then an x squared and then a y. So let's try that. 2x squared y and see what we're left with. So that's going to be 9x squared, and then in the center we would have plus 12xy, and then minus 5y squared. Now we still don't have, that's a perfect square, but 5 is not. So now we're going to have to try to factor by trial and error if we want to factor completely. Okay, so there's a couple of options for 9, but there's only one option for 5. That's a prime number. So I'm going to put 5y and y. So that's half the puzzle. So now we've got to put something so that I can get a 12 in the middle. So 9 and 1 or 3 and 3. I'm definitely thinking 3x and 3x because I would have a 15 and a 3, and I can get a 12 out of that. So let's try a plus here. That'd give me plus 15xy, and a minus here. That'd be minus 3xy. So let's double check that by FOILing in our head. So 9x squared plus 15xy minus 3xy give us 12, and then minus 5y squared. And, that's probably one of the toughest ones that you would get. Not the longest one, but, you have to, it looks pretty ugly. And, you have to do some trial and error. All right, number 10, we want to factor. So everyone is factor from now on, so I'm just going to quit writing that. So we have 64x squared minus 48xy plus 9y squared. All right, so now we're cooking. This is a factoring pattern. So a is equal to 8x, and b is equal to 3y, and 2ab would be 8 times 3 is 24 times 2 would be 48. We know it's a minus here. So this should factor because it's two perfect squares. Our factoring pattern, it should factor into a minus b all squared, right? So that's going to be 8x minus 3y all squared. So how would we check that? Well, we would check it, and I'm just going to do it on this one, but on your test I would suggest you do it. We're going to FOIL that back out. And if you do that, you'd get 64x squared minus 24xy, another minus 24xy, so that'd be minus 48xy, and then plus 9y squared. So amazing. You could check it in your head if you're good at math in your head. But you know, you don't have to. Really on the test, all I'm looking for is did you show me A and B, and did you give me the right answer? But if you get it wrong, then I can't give you as much partial credit than if you actually went and checked it. Or if you go check it, if you made an error, then you can fix the error. Okay, that's really the reason to check it. All right, great. So we're into our patterns now, which is great. It's shorter problems. And number 11, we want to factor 3r plus u all squared minus 6 times 3r plus u plus 9. So you could recognize that this quantity is a perfect square, where a is going to be 3r plus u. And then 9 is a perfect square, so b is 3. And there's a minus here. So this would factor into, I'm going to use a bracket here, 3r plus u, quantity 3r plus u, then minus 3, and then all squared. So you could multiply that out by FOILing to check, or you could try doing it in your head. If you have time on the test, it's worth, what else are you going to do? You may as well check it. You might want to wait to the end and you're finished, and then check them at the end so that you make sure that you have time. But yeah, that's a quick problem to work if you recognize the pattern. Okay, number 12, 4x to the fourth minus 81. This one is the difference of two perfect squares. We have a perfect square here and a perfect square here. So a is going to be 2x squared if you take the square root of 4x to the fourth, and b is 9. So that factors into our factoring pattern is a plus b times a minus b. All right, so that's going to be 2x squared plus 9 times 2x squared minus 9. You could FOIL that out to check. I have had a student or two in the past just write this and then forget that they needed to write out the actual answer. So, make sure that you don't just write a plus b times a minus b. Just the formula. All right, how about 64? All right, 64f cubed minus 125. Well, this is the difference of two perfect cubes. So if you're not sure if 64 is or 125 is, just in your calculator raise those two numbers to the 1/3 power, and you should come out with a whole number. So 64 would be just 4, and then f cubed is going to be f. So if you cube that quantity, it's going to be 64f cubed, and then b is 5. Okay, so to factor, it is a minus b. I'm going to just write that on the first one. You don't have to write this on your paper, times a squared plus ab plus b squared. So that's the formula. If you want to write that out, if it helps you do it, so we'd have 4f minus 5 times a squared, that's 16f squared, plus 5 times 4 is 20f, plus b squared would be 25. All right, so just be careful and make sure you get all these terms correct. Make sure you get the signs correct. But these problems to me are just really cool. If you recognize the pattern, it's just so fast. Let's see if I can squeeze number 14 in here. So we've got s minus 2p all cubed plus 8. These are also two perfect cubes. This time it's a plus. So a is s minus 2p, and b is the cube root of 8 is 2. So our formula is right up here. It's going to be a plus b this time. So I'm going to use a bracket since we have a quantity in parentheses. So that's going to be s minus 2p plus 2, close the bracket. And now we have a squared, so s minus 2p all squared minus is the next one, and it's a times b. So we like to put the coefficient first. 2 times s minus 2p, and then plus b squared, so plus 4. All right. So it looks nasty, but you know, it's really not bad if you're careful. Most of the mistakes I've had in the past with students on this is really just not being careful. All right, and we've got 2 more to do. Okay, 15, want to factor x to the 24th plus y to the 27th. So you need to recognize that 24 and 27 are both multiples of 3. So we can rewrite this as x to the 8th cubed plus y to the 9th cubed. All right, and then what we would have here is a is x to the 8th and b is y to the 9th. So factoring, we would have x, this is a the sum of two perfect cubes. So that's going to be x to the 8th plus y to the 9th times a squared, so that'd be x to the 16th minus ab, so x to the 8th, y to the 9th, and then plus b squared, which would be y to the 18th. All right, again, looks terrible, but is not bad at all. And then finally, number 16, this is where we're combining all the computational techniques. You should definitely expect to have to do one of these. 2x to the 6th minus 8x to the 4th plus 3x to the 5th minus 12x cubed. All right, so let's factor by grouping first. So that's going to be a 2x to the 4th for this group and 3x cubed for this group. All right, so what you're going to be, when you do 2x to the 4th, what's left would be x squared minus 4. And then 3x cubed, we would have x squared, and we're going to want it to be minus 4. And then we'll have a plus here in order to distribute and get back to the original equation. So we can rewrite this as 2x to the 4th plus 3x cubed times x squared minus 4. Where you can't stop here. There's actually 2 more things you can do. First of all, you can factor out an x cubed out of this first term. So that leaves 2x plus 3. And then this term is the difference of two perfect squares, where a is x and b is 2. All right, so a is x, 2 squared is 4. So that's going to factor into x plus 2 times x minus 2. All right, so that's a beautiful factor. All right, so let's talk about, that does it for the solutions. Let's talk about the test just a little bit. So how to study for this test is going to be the same as the last test. I don't have the historical average in front of me, so I will put that on Teams when it's time to take the test, but I believe it is somewhere in the 89 to 90 range. So I could be wrong about that, but somewhere in between like 89 and 91, so I'll put 91. I could be wrong about that, but it's not one of the harder tests for sure. It has pretty high average. How to study for this? I would review all notes. Rework all problems. In fact, you know what? I'm going to tell you, first you should look over all the homework. And then rework problems that gave you trouble. Maybe that gave you trouble the first time around. And then if you have time, you can definitely do these first three. If you have time, you could just rework all the homework. That's if you're trying to get maybe 100 on the test. You might go back and just rework all the homework. But I wouldn't say you can get 100 without doing that. But if you're wanting to guarantee a really high grade, you could do that. And you could rewatch these solutions videos. Maybe on a higher speed. But you could do both or just one of those two to add to these first three of basic study. All right, so good luck on the test. I hope it goes well for you, and I'll talk to you on the next one.